The Canon 5D series has been one of Canon's most popular camera lines, and these particular cameras really did stand out from the crowd because of how well-rounded the specs were. They were great for all types of photography, from portraits, weddings, studios, events, wildlife, and even landscapes. So today we're going to be looking at why these cameras are so special and why so many professional photographers have them in their camera bag in this episode of Retro Reviews. And I'm going to start right now. So since the early 2000s, when they've created digital cameras, Canon have actually released 8 cameras that have bared the name 5, part of their 5D series, although they have changed the name in recent years to R to replicate their mirrorless technology. So we're going to look through every single camera that Canon have released, part of their 5D series, to work out where they're going to be taking this series in the future. But first, we should start off where it all began in 2004 with the original, the legacy, the Canon 5D. This here is Canon's very first normal-sized full-frame DSLR. The only other camera that was actually out that was a full-frame digital sensor was the Canon 1DS Mark II, and that was ludicrously expensive, almost double the price of this camera. This is why this particular camera here found its way into a lot of professional camera bags. A lot of people were still shooting film at the time, so this particular camera was a real pinnacle of introducing the digital sensor into professional photography. This camera here was launched in August 2004 and supported a 13 megapixel full frame sensor with 9 autofocus points. It also shot at 3 frames per second and had an ISO range from 100 to 3200. It also weighed 895 grams and was one of Canon's very first cameras that actually had a CF card slot, although this camera here had no live view at the time and it also had no video. Now this camera was actually really important for Canon. At the time, they didn't have a lot of digital cameras. They were still relying on their film cameras, although the actual ecosystem was slowly changing with Nikon releasing cameras as well as Pentax and Minolta. So this was really important for Canon and it actually did really well. But I must say the second generation Canon camera did a lot better, the Canon 5D Mark II. So this here is the Canon 5D Mark II. Released in September 2008, it had a massive upgrade in resolution all the way up to 21 megapixels. It also supported 9 autofocus points and had an increased frames per second all the way up to 3.9. It also had an increase in its ISO or low light performance, an expanded range from 100 all the way up to 25,600. It also weighed a little bit less as well, coming in at just 810 grams, and it also had a CF card slot, but only one. It also supported, and it was the very first Canon camera to support this, full HD at 30 frames per second. In fact, it was the very first Canon camera to do this, as well as having live view. Now, this was really important for this camera, and it was kind of the fundamental reason a lot of people upgraded from the Mark I, because it actually supported video. And because of that, it was incredibly popular. And due to that, this is where the name really started to kind of really stand for something. A lot of professional photographers liked the 5D range because of how well-rounded the specs were. But later on, in 2012, they finally updated it to the 5D Mark III. Launched in March 2012, this was a massive upgrade over the 5D Mark II and is still really popular today, coming in with a 22 megapixel full frame sensor with a whopping 61 autofocus points. It also had a pretty much double the frames per second, all the way up to 6 frames per second. It also had an expanded ISO range from 100 to 102,400, although it did weigh a little bit more than the 5D Mark II, coming in at just 860 grams. This is also one of the first Canon 5Ds to actually have dual SD card slots. So it had a CF card slot as well as an SD UHS-1 SD card slot. It also had a decent upgrade when it comes to frame rates, when it comes to its overall video performance. Although it didn't support C-Log, the overall video performance was massively upgraded. And because of that, this camera did find its way into a lot of camera bags. And still to this day, it is incredibly popular. But Canon threw a curveball in 2015 when they released not just one, but two brand new 5D cameras. In June, they actually released two, the 5DS and the 5DSR. Now these cameras are basically the same camera for one major reason: megapixels. These cameras were incredibly high megapixels, and at the time, they're actually the highest resolution full frame DSLR that you could purchase. Released in June 2015, these cameras had a whopping 50 megapixel full frame sensor with roughly the same specs of the 5D Mark III. So it had full 61 autofocus points and it shot 5 frames per second, a little bit of a drop just due to the incredibly high resolution. It also had a slightly reduced ISO range from 100 to 12,800, again, just due to that incredibly high resolution. And they came in at roughly the same weight, although a little bit less, at 845 grams. Yes, these cameras could film video, although they weren't specifically designed for that. So what is the difference between the 5DS and the 5DSR? Well, the 5DS, like all other cameras, have a low pass filter. Now this low pass filter is great for reducing quite a few problems that some sensors can suffer from, specifically moire. If you ever find that you're shooting a particular texture and it's coming up with these wavy, patterny lines, this is called moire. And most sensors are designed with a low pass filter to reduce this, but the problem with a low pass filter is it can sometimes soften your images. So if you want just a generic low pass filter, you go ahead and buy the 5DS. But if you're after exquisite sharpness, maybe if you're a studio photographer, then you'd buy the 5DSR. The 5DSR actually has a cancelled low pass filter. So it actually has an extra filter that cancels out the effects of the low pass filter built directly into the sensor, designed to get sharper images, although you do have the big negative of suffering from more moire within your photos. So these cameras were very popular, not as popular as the traditional 5Ds, and they didn't actually replace the 5D Mark III, but they were incredibly popular for a lot of studio and landscape photographers that were just dying for a higher resolution 5D. But in 2016, just 1 year later, Canon surprised us with the 5D Mark IV. Now, the 5D Mark IV has been Canon's most popular 5D to date. It has been an amazing milestone camera, and to be honest, it has been one of the most popular cameras for working professionals. It had great specs, and you can still buy it actually in 2022, brand new today. Launched in August 2016, this has a 30 megapixel full frame CMOS sensor with 61 autofocus points. It also shot with a maximum frame rate of 7 frames per second with an expanded ISO range from 100 to 102,400. It also had dual SD card slots, the CF card slot, which has been traditional for all 5Ds so far, but it also had a UHS 2 SD card slot as well. It also was one of Canon's very first cameras to support 4K recording, although it did record crop of 1.75. It also had a brand new 3.2-inch versatile touchscreen. Again, the very first 5D to actually have that. And because of that, everyone picked it up. It was incredibly popular. It was definitely one of the more expensive Canon cameras out on the market. The only other camera that was more expensive than this was the Canon 1DX Mark II, but it was incredibly popular for working professionals, and it stayed that way until Canon surprised us with an absolute dream of a camera in July 2020, the Canon EOS R5. The Canon R5 is the latest and greatest of what Canon have to offer with their 5D line. This is a big upgrade from the 5D4 for a variety of reasons, but the main reason it is a mirrorless camera. All other Canon 5Ds so far we've talked about have been a DSLR, which stands for Digital Single Lens Reflex. But this camera doesn't fall under that, it is a mirrorless camera. And due to that, the specs are massively increased over the 5D. Actually, the overall big specs are the autofocus, but let's talk about the overall specs first. Released in July 2020, this camera supports a whopping 45 megapixel full frame sensor with a whopping 1053 autofocus points. That means it can do eye, head, animal, automotive, but also live tracking as well. And that's really important for a lot of professionals today. The older cameras could do some sort of tracking with some autofocus points, but this has a 100% coverage, which means if you're taking a photo of it, you can focus and track on it. It also has an expanded ISO range from 100 to 51,200 with dual cards, a brand new CF Express Type B card designed for its high resolution video but also photography, and it also has a UHS-2 SD card slot. It was also the Canon's lightest 5D camera, coming in at just 650 grams. And this is one of Canon's very first cameras that could support 8K RAW recording. Now this is a big upgrade, doesn't matter where you come from on the Canon lineup. It's got a full oscillating touchscreen 3.2 inch, which makes it so easy for video, but also photography at different angles and orientations. But it also had IBIS, which is in-body image stabilization, which is a game changer if you're using it either for video, but also for low light photography. And the ability of it being able to shoot silent, amazing if noise is an issue, especially if you're shooting a quiet event like a funeral, or maybe you're shooting a wedding. So this camera here really is the pinnacle of what 5Ds are. Great, well-rounded, awesome cameras designed for professionals and amateurs alike. But it isn't technically the latest and greatest. Canon, in January 2022, released the R5C. The R5C is designed not to replace the R5, think of it more of a variant, very similar to the 5DS and 5DSR. It's not to replace, but it's designed to focus on a specific type of photography. The 5DS and 5DSR focused on the high resolution studio, but the R5C is designed to focus on the video specs and really amplify that. This particular camera has got amazing video specs. Think of this camera as the Canon C70, which is one of Canon's cheapest cinema cameras, and the Canon EOS R5 combined into one magnificent camera. It has great photography specs, like for instance basically everything that the R5 offers, with the ability of being able to shoot 8K RAW light, as well as a whole variety of brand new video specs that have never been seen in a photography camera so far. And it can even offer things like unlimited recording, where for instance the R5 did not offer that. Also, the R5 had problems with overheating, so the R5C has got fans, and it's designed to be more of a workhorse when it comes to the video side of things, because again, a lot of people are now starting to move into that. Yes, you can just be a photographer today, or yes, you can be a videographer, but you're more likely to get work if you can do both. And you'll see a lot of people now actually choosing what camera, not just with the photography, but also the video specs as well. So the Canon R5C has actually put a big question mark on where they're going to be taking the R5 series later on. I actually think they're probably going to be creating more variants. One particular variant I'll be very interested in is the R5S. Again, very similar to the 5DS and the 5D Mark III, this is basically going to be a super amped up high megapixel version of the R5. So if we have a look at the actual 5D Mark III, that was roughly 20 megapixels, and then we jump up all the way to 50 with the 5DS and 5DSR. So if we do roughly the same with the R5, let's say they double the resolution from 45 all the way up to 90 megapixels. This camera will probably be really popular for a lot of studio and landscape photographers, maybe people that love cropping. It might even be great for instance, wildlife photographers, who knows? And this camera would actually be really interesting to see, and if they create more variants in the future. But I guess the big question I ask is, when will the R5 retire? If we actually have a look back in history, there's a gap of around 3 to 4 years between generations, and because the actual R5 got released in 2020, I would actually expect that a new R5 Mark II possibly might be released as early as 2024. That's roughly when Canon 5D cameras seem to be updated. Every 3 to 4 years seems to be the trend if we look at the 5D1, 2, 3, but also the 5D4. So it'll be interesting, will they create more variants, like for instance the 5DS or the R5C, or will they create a R5 Mark II in the next 2 years? Who knows, but what do you guys think? Are you hoping for a higher resolution R5S, or are you waiting out for the R5 Mark II? Maybe it will fix some of those overheating problems that the R5 always struggled with. Write it down in the comments below what you guys think. Again guys, if you want to like, comment and subscribe to my channel, it really does help my channel grow. Also guys, if you want to hit the bell notification so you don't miss any of my latest videos. I release a Tuesday's 2-minute tutorials, and I also release videos on Friday. Have a good rest of the day, and I'll catch you guys next time.